My name is Natalie, 33 years old, and I spent 5 years building an empire in the shadows while my family treated me like the dirt on their designer shoes. Sitting at a Michelin-starred dinner, I listened to my sister's rich new girlfriend mock my clothes and my job. When I tried to defend myself, my own husband gripped my leg under the table and hissed at me to stay quiet. They all thought I was just a failed grad school dropout playing on a laptop. They had absolutely no idea that I held the power to destroy their entire corporate future with a single click. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to smile through the disrespect of toxic family members who vastly underestimate your worth. The crystal chandeliers of Le Bouclier cast a cold, sharp light over our table. This was one of the most exclusive restaurants in Chicago, the kind of place where a single appetizer cost more than my weekly grocery bill. My mother Susan had insisted we celebrate Amanda's new relationship here. Amanda was my older sister, the undeniable golden child of the family. At 35, she was polished, ruthless, and everything my parents ever wanted in a daughter. Beside her sat Rachel, her new girlfriend, a high-powered mergers and acquisitions director at Apex Media. I sat quietly across from them, wearing a simple black dress I had picked up at Target a few years ago. I liked the dress. It was comfortable. But in a sea of Chanel blazers and Rolex watches, I might as well have been wearing a garbage bag. Rachel took a sip of her perfectly chilled Chablis, her eyes scanning me with blatant amusement. "So, Natalie?" She began, her voice dripping with that specific brand of corporate condescension. "Amanda tells me you are still doing that little blogging hobby. It is so cute that you have a creative outlet to keep you busy during the day. Does it bring in enough to pay for your internet bill, or does Greg still have to cover that?" A hot flush of humiliation crept up my neck. The entire table went silent, waiting for my reaction. I looked at my mother, hoping for a shred of maternal defense. Instead, Susan just chuckled, swirling the wine in her glass. "Oh, let her be Rachel," my mother said, though her tone was anything but kind. "Natalie has always lacked Amanda's drive. Not everyone is cut out for the real business world. Some people are just meant to be spectators." Amanda leaned forward, placing her perfectly manicured hand over Rachel's. "Exactly. I mean, we all remember what happened with grad school. You just could not handle the pressure, could you, Nat? It is fine. The world needs people to stay home and write cute little journal entries." My father Richard let out a booming laugh, slicing into his dry-aged steak. "Well," said Amanda, "just make sure you do not ask us for a loan when your laptop breaks, Natalie. I am done funding your little experiments." My chest tightened. The injustice of it all tasted like ash in my mouth. They were talking about the decision I made 5 years ago to drop out of my MBA program. They thought I quit because I was weak. They had no idea I dropped out because I had conceptualized a digital media platform so innovative that I needed every waking second to build it. They did not know that my little blogging hobby was actually a $40 million digital empire that I managed completely anonymously. I opened my mouth, ready to push back, ready to tell Rachel that she was a glorified middleman while I was an actual creator. "Actually, Rachel, my work is a lot more complex than you think. I manage a massive portfolio of digital assets, and we are currently—" Before I could finish the sentence, a heavy hand clamped down on my left thigh under the table. It was Greg, my husband of 6 years. His grip was tight, his fingers digging into my skin hard enough to bruise. I turned to look at him, expecting to see support in his eyes. Greg was a mid-level branch manager at a retail bank. He had always been insecure about his mediocre salary, constantly trying to project an image of wealth we did not have. Right now, his face was pale, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked in his cheek. He leaned in close to my ear, his voice a venomous whisper meant only for me. "Stop it. Stop making a scene. You are embarrassing me in front of actual successful people. Just shut your mouth and eat." The betrayal hit me harder than the insults. My own husband, the man who was supposed to be my partner, was actively participating in my degradation just to curry favor with my sister's rich girlfriend. He wanted to belong to their world so badly that he was willing to serve me up on a silver platter to get there. I looked at Greg's hand still gripping my leg. Then I looked at Rachel, who was currently smirking at me, looking incredibly pleased with herself. She thought she had won. She thought I was nothing. I took a slow, deep breath, forced a polite smile, and picked up my fork. I stayed quiet. But underneath the table, my free hand slipped into my purse and grabbed my phone. It was time to show them exactly what my little hobby could do. Rachel leaned back in her plush leather chair and signaled the sommelier for another bottle of their most expensive vintage. She was holding court, ignoring my existence, now turning her attention back to my parents, who hung on her every word. "You know, Richard," she said, addressing my father with a familiarity Greg had spent 6 years trying to achieve. "The corporate landscape is about knowing when to strike. Right now, I'm about to close the biggest acquisition Apex Media has seen in a decade." My father beamed, leaning over his half-eaten steak. "Is that right? I knew you were a shark, Rachel. Tell us about it." Amanda draped her arm around Rachel's shoulders, looking as proud as if she had brokered the deal herself. "Oh, she is being modest. This deal is going to make her vice president by next quarter. She is acquiring a massive digital portfolio from a ghost company." Rachel smirked, adjusting her diamond cuffs. "It is called Lumina Digital. It is an extremely lucrative lifestyle and media network. The bizarre thing is that the founder is completely anonymous, a total ghost. They operate through a blind trust and a wall of corporate lawyers. But whoever this founder is, they are incredibly naive about how the big leagues work. We have them backed into a corner. I structured a hostile buyout that basically forces them to sell to us at 20% below market value. It is aggressive, sure, but in this industry, you eat or you get eaten." Underneath the table, my thumb hovered over my phone screen. The screen illuminated my lap with a faint glow, displaying the two-factor authentication prompt for the Lumina Digital Secure Server. My heart pounded against my ribs, but my breathing remained perfectly steady. Lumina Digital. My company. For 3 months, my legal team had been fielding aggressive, frankly insulting acquisition offers from a massive conglomerate. My lawyers advised me to string them along to see how high they would bid, even though I had zero intention of selling the empire I built from scratch. I knew the acquiring company was Apex Media. What I did not know until this very second was that the ruthless director spearheading the buyout was sitting directly across from me, eating a $70 piece of fish and laughing at my clothes. "That is brilliant," my mother cooed, raising her glass. "It takes real intelligence to outsmart these startup amateurs. They get a little success and think they own the world. They need someone like you to put them in their place." Greg nodded vigorously, his eyes wide with desperate admiration. "Absolutely. It is all about leverage. You have to show them who has the real capital. That is how real wealth is built, not by writing blog posts from a living room sofa." He shot me a pointed, disgusted look. I met his gaze, my face a carefully blank mask. He thought he was aligning himself with a titan of industry. He thought he was securing his place in the wealthy elite by throwing his wife under the bus. I unlocked my phone. I bypassed the standard apps and opened the encrypted portal my lead developer custom built for me. Face recognition cleared the firewall. A dashboard loaded, displaying real-time analytics revenue streams and a massive folder labeled Apex Media Acquisition File. Rachel was still talking, her voice echoing over the clinking of crystal glasses. "The paperwork is finalized on our end. I am waiting for the founder to sign the electronic documents. My assistant is monitoring the portal tonight. The moment that signature drops, Apex Media swallows Lumina whole, and I get my corner office on the 50th floor. It is basically a done deal. I already put a down payment on a new Porsche to celebrate." I opened the Apex Media folder. The final offer was sitting right there, flagged as urgent by my general counsel. Below the dense legal jargon, there were 2 distinct buttons. One green button that read accept. One red button that read decline. My thumb hovered over the red button. I looked up at the table. My family was toasting to Rachel. They were toasting to her brilliance, her cunning, and her impending wealth. They were celebrating the destruction of a naive startup founder, blissfully unaware that the founder was sitting right there, sipping tap water. I tapped the red button. A prompt appeared on the screen. Please specify reason for termination of negotiations. I tapped the text box. Using only my right thumb completely out of sight beneath the heavy linen tablecloth, I typed my response. I made sure every single letter was deliberate. Decline and terminate negotiations. Reason hostile and unethical buyer conduct. I stared at the confirmation screen. Rachel let out a loud, ringing laugh at something my father said, tossing her hair back confidently. I hit confirm. The screen refreshed. The status of the multi-million-dollar Apex Media acquisition changed from pending to terminated. The connection was severed. The deal was dead. I locked my phone, slipped it back into my purse, and finally took a bite of my dinner. It tasted absolutely delicious. Rachel was in the middle of a story about a yacht party in Monaco when her phone vibrated against the table. The sharp buzz cut through her laughter. Annoyed at the interruption, she picked it up, glancing at the screen with a dismissive roll of her eyes. She clearly expected a congratulatory message, a confirmation that the deal was sealed. Instead, the smug, self-assured smile on her face completely evaporated. It was like watching a balloon pop in slow motion. Her perfectly contoured features slackened. Her eyes widened, darting back and forth across the screen, as if she could not comprehend the words she was reading. She tapped the screen frantically, her manicured nails clicking against the glass, refreshing the email application over and over again. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking sallow under the restaurant's warm lighting. "Rachel. Honey? What is it?" Amanda asked, leaning closer. Her brow furrowed in sudden concern. "Did the confirmation come through?" Rachel did not answer. She was breathing rapidly, a faint, wheezing sound escaping her throat. She gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. "This cannot be right. This is a mistake. A massive, stupid mistake." She scrambled from her chair, almost knocking over her expensive glass of Chablis. She jammed the phone to her ear, ignoring the stares of the other patrons in the quiet, elegant dining room. "Pick up," she hissed into the receiver, pacing in the small space between our table and a decorative pillar. "Pick up the damn phone, Brian." When her assistant finally answered, Rachel exploded. The carefully cultivated persona of a composed corporate executive vanished, replaced by sheer panic. "What do you mean they pulled out?" She screamed, her voice cracking, causing several heads to turn in our direction. "What do you mean hostile and unethical? We offered them a fortune." "You call their legal team right now. You tell them this is a misunderstanding. If this deal dies, my promotion dies with it, Brian. I will fire you before you can even pack your desk." She paced faster, her heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor. "Fix it!" she demanded, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "Find out who the founder is and get them on the phone with me immediately. I do not care if they are hiding behind a trust. Find them." Greg had stopped chewing. His fork hung suspended in midair, his eyes wide and fixed on Rachel. The color had completely vanished from his face, leaving him looking ashen and suddenly very old. A thin sheen of sweat broke out across his forehead. He slowly lowered his fork to his plate, his hand trembling slightly. "What is happening?" he whispered, though the question seemed directed more at himself than anyone at the table. "Why is she panicking?" Amanda stood up, reaching for Rachel's arm. "Rachel, please sit down. People are staring. What exactly is going on?" Rachel whirled around, swatting Amanda's hand away with unexpected force. "What is going on? I will tell you what is going on. Lumina Digital just pulled the plug. They terminated the negotiations. Completely, without warning. The deal is dead." My father dropped his napkin on the table, his booming voice dropping to a serious, hushed tone. "Dead? How can it be dead? You just said they were backed into a corner. You said the paperwork was waiting for a signature." "They lied." Rachel yelled, not caring who heard her. "The founder just cited hostile and unethical conduct. Do you understand what that means? If the board finds out a $40 million acquisition fell through because of my conduct, I am not just losing the promotion. They will fire me. They will blackball me in the industry. Everything I have built is gone." Greg let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles matching Rachel's in their stark whiteness. "No." He muttered, his voice barely audible. No, that cannot happen. The stock was supposed to split. The tip was guaranteed. My mother looked between Rachel and Greg, utterly confused by Greg's sudden extreme reaction. Greg, are you all right? You look like you are going to be sick. Greg ignored her. He stared at Rachel with a look of pure terror. If you lose your job, what happens to the internal stock options? The ones you told me about. The ones tied to the acquisition. They are worthless. Rachel snapped, running a trembling hand through her hair. Worthless. Just like me if I cannot fix this. The waiter approached tentatively, holding the leather-bound check presenter. Excuse me, sir, he said softly to my father. Is everything all right with the table? Bring the check! My father barked, his jovial mood entirely shattered. We are leaving. Now. The dinner that was supposed to be a celebration of my sister's glorious new life had devolved into an absolute disaster. Amanda was trying to calm a hyperventilating Rachel. My father was aggressively signing the receipt, and my mother was demanding explanations. Nobody had the time or sanity to give. And then there was Greg. My husband sat frozen in his chair, staring blankly at the untouched steak on his plate, looking like a man who had just realized he was standing on a landmine, and he had already heard the click. I quietly placed my napkin on the table and stood up. I smoothed the skirt of my simple Target dress, feeling a profound, terrifying sense of calm wash over me. The guillotine had dropped, and I was the only one who knew who pulled the lever. The walk out of Le Bouclier felt like a funeral procession. Nobody spoke. My father did not bother to say goodbye as he practically shoved my mother into their waiting town car. Amanda was too busy hovering over Rachel, who was frantically scrolling through her phone, her hands shaking so badly she dropped her expensive clutch onto the pavement. Greg did not even wait for me. He practically sprinted to the valet stand, handing over his ticket with trembling fingers. When our mid-sized sedan finally pulled up, Greg threw himself into the driver's seat before I even had the door fully open. The moment the heavy car doors slammed shut, enclosing us in the dark cabin, the silence became suffocating. It was a thick, heavy quiet, broken only by the sound of Greg's ragged breathing. He threw the car into drive and slammed his foot on the gas pedal. The tires screeched slightly against the asphalt as we lurched into the Chicago night traffic. I fastened my seatbelt, watching him out of the corner of my eye. The streetlights flickered across his face, illuminating the stark terror etched into his features. Sweat was beading on his forehead, gathering at his temples, and dripping down the side of his neck. He wiped it away aggressively with the back of his hand, leaving a shiny smear across his skin. His driving was erratic, bordering on dangerous. He swerved into the left lane without signaling, cutting off a taxi driver who blared his horn in protest. Greg did not even flinch. His eyes were wide-locked on the road ahead, but I knew he was not really seeing the taillights of the cars in front of us. He was staring straight into the abyss of his own making. He ran a yellow light that had clearly turned red, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles looked like they might burst through his skin. I let the silence stretch for another 10 minutes. I wanted him to marinate in his panic. I wanted the reality of the situation to slowly suffocate his ego. Finally, as we merged onto the highway heading toward our quiet suburban neighborhood, I turned my head slightly and spoke. My voice was soft, carefully modulated to sound confused and mildly concerned. Greg, I do not understand why you are acting like this, I said, keeping my tone perfectly innocent. Why are you driving so fast? It is just Rachel's job. She had a bad night at work. Why are you sweating so much over a deal that has nothing to do with us? The words were a lit match thrown into a pool of gasoline. Greg slammed his hands against the steering wheel. The sudden violence of the movement made me jump slightly, though my heart remained ice cold. Nothing to do with us, he roared, his voice cracking under the strain of his panic. Are you actually that stupid, Natalie? Are you really that blind to how the real world operates? I shrank back against the leather seat, playing the part of the intimidated wife to absolute perfection. I do not know what you mean. I just asked a question. You do not know what I mean because you live in a fantasy world, he yelled, spittle flying from his lips and hitting the dashboard. You sit in your pajamas all day typing away on your laptop pretending you are contributing to this marriage. You are a useless freeloader, Natalie. You have no concept of high finance. You have no idea what it takes to build real wealth. I have carried the financial burden of this family for 5 years while you play pretend on the internet. He swerved into the exit lane, taking the curve way too fast. The car tilted the tires, groaning in protest. Rachel was our ticket. He continued, his breathing heavy and ragged. She had access to internal stock options. She had insider information on the Apex Media acquisition. Do you even know what that means? Of course you do not. It means guaranteed money. It means moving out of our pathetic starter home and into the life I actually deserve. The life I would have if I was not chained to a woman who has zero ambition. I stared at him, letting his insults wash over me. Every word he spoke was just another nail in his coffin. He was so consumed by his own arrogance, so desperate to be part of a club that would never accept him, that he could not see the architect of his destruction sitting in his passenger seat. But Greg. I pressed gently, pushing him right to the edge of the cliff. Even if her stock tips fall through, why are you so terrified? We have our savings. We have our house. Greg let out a sound that was a terrifying mix of a laugh and a sob. He turned his head, looking at me with eyes that were entirely feral. The streetlights illuminated the absolute desperation on his face. You really do not get it, he whispered, his voice vibrating with a terrifying intensity. There are no savings, Natalie. The insider tip was a sure thing, a guaranteed return. If Rachel loses this deal, if she goes down for this. He swallowed hard, turning his eyes back to the dark road as we turned onto our street. If Rachel goes down, we lose the house. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. He did not elaborate. He did not explain how Rachel's corporate failure was tied to the roof over our heads. But I already knew. The engine cut off as we pulled into our driveway, the tires crunching against the gravel. We sat in the dark car, the only sound the ticking of the cooling engine as the weight of his terrifying hint settled over us. Greg shoved his door open and stumbled out of the car. He did not wait for me, practically sprinting up the front steps and fumbling with his keys to unlock the front door. By the time I stepped into the foyer, he was already in the kitchen. The sound of glass clinking against granite echoed through the quiet house. He poured cheap bourbon into a tumbler, his hands shaking violently. He downed the drink in one long gulp, slammed the glass down, and marched past me toward the hallway closet. He pulled his suitcase from the closet and threw it onto the rug. "What are you doing?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. My calmness seemed to infuriate him even more. "What does it look like I am doing?" he snarled violently, unzipping the suitcase. "I am packing my things. I really need to get out of here. I need to go to my brother's place in the city until this blows over. If Rachel goes down, the SEC will investigate everyone connected to her." He stormed into our bedroom and started grabbing handfuls of clothes from his dresser, shoving them into the bag. I followed him, leaning against the doorframe. "Connected to her," I repeated, crossing my arms. "You manage a retail bank branch, Greg. Why would the SEC care about you? You do not work for Apex." He threw a stack of dress shirts into the suitcase and whirled around to face me. His bloodshot eyes burned with blind rage. "Because I invested, Natalie. I invested heavily. Rachel gave me a tip on the Lumina buyout weeks ago. It was supposed to be a sure thing. The stock was going to split the moment the acquisition was announced. I was going to triple our money overnight." "Our money?" I asked, softly, feigning genuine confusion. "We barely have $10,000 in our joint savings account." "That is not exactly a high-roller investment, Greg. Even if you lost all of it, it does not explain why you are packing a bag and talking about losing the roof over our heads." Greg let out a bitter, mocking laugh that echoed terribly in our bedroom. $10,000. You think $10,000 gets you a seat at the adult table? God, you are so incredibly naive. You have spent the last 5 years living in a complete delusion of how the real world operates. He stepped closer to me, pointing a trembling finger directly at my chest. "I have carried this family on my back for 5 years. 5 long years of waking up at 6 in the morning, putting on a suit, and kissing up to regional directors who do not even know my name. I pay the mortgage every single month. I pay the utility bills. I pay for the groceries you eat. And what do? You sit on the couch in your sweatpants and play on your laptop. My jaw tightened. I did not play on my laptop. I built an infrastructure. I managed a massive team of remote developers and content creators. I negotiated million-dollar ad revenue contracts while he complained about processing auto loans. But I kept my mouth shut. I needed him to dig his own grave completely. "So you resent me," I said, maintaining my perfectly crafted, innocent tone. "That is fine. But it still does not answer my question. What did you mean in the car when you said we lose the house?" Greg turned away, running both hands through his thinning hair. He paced back and forth at the foot of the bed like a trapped animal. "You do not understand how high finance works. You do not understand what it takes to actually make moves in the corporate world. You have to leverage what you have to get what you want." I stepped further into the room, closing the physical distance between us. "Stop talking in circles right now, Greg. What did you do? What did you leverage?" He stopped pacing. He looked at me, his chest heaving, the stench of cheap bourbon radiating off his breath. The sheer panic in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a defensive, vicious sneer. He wanted to hurt me because he was hurting. He wanted to tear me down to make himself feel bigger in the face of his own catastrophic failure. "I leveraged the only real asset we have," he spat, his voice laced with absolute venom. "I did what I had to do because you refused to contribute anything of value to this marriage. I took out a loan, Natalie, a really massive loan." My blood ran cold even though I already knew the answer. "Against what I demanded. Against our own house, you stupid woman." The words struck the air between us like physical blows. For a moment, the only sound in the bedroom was the ragged, heavy breathing escaping his chest. I stared at him, letting the absolute magnitude of what he just confessed wash over me. A home equity line of credit. He had taken a loan against the only physical asset we shared, the house that I had meticulously paid the mortgage on, using the quiet dividends from Lumina. "How much?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. I did not scream or cry, I just needed the exact number. Greg crossed his arms, his posture defensive, but laced with a sick kind of pride. $500,000. Every single cent of equity we had built up over the last 6 years. Rachel told me about the Lumina acquisition a month ago. She said Apex Media was going to announce it next week and the stock would go through the roof. I needed liquid capital, Natalie. You do not make real money by playing it safe. You have to take massive risks. I pulled the equity, transferred it to a brokerage account, and bought Apex call options. When the deal closed, it was going to be worth over $1 million. I was going to hand you a check and prove to you that I was the one pulling us out of mediocrity. He was actually delusional. He had gambled $500,000 on an insider trading tip just to massage his own bruised ego. But there was a massive, glaring legal hole in his brilliant master plan, and it was time to let him hang himself with it. I stepped back, leaning against the edge of our dresser. I crossed my arms, matching his defensive posture. "That is impossible, Greg. My name is on the deed to this house. We bought it together. A bank cannot approve a $500,000 home equity line of credit without both homeowners signing the loan documents. The mortgage broker would require a mountain of paperwork." I looked him dead in the eye, dropping my voice to a whisper. "I never signed those papers." A nasty, condescending sneer spread across Greg's face. He laughed, a harsh, grating sound that made my skin crawl. "God, you are so deeply naive. You think the rules actually apply to people who know how to work the system. You think a little missing signature was going to stop me from securing our financial future." My heart beat steadily, cold and precise. "You forged my signature," I stated, making sure the words were absolutely clear in the quiet room. Greg rolled his eyes, walking over to his nightstand to grab his watch and shove it into his bag. "Of course I did. You would have never agreed to it. You would have panicked and cried about risk and savings accounts. You do not have the stomach for real investments, so I took care of it. I printed the documents, signed your name, and brought them to work. I watched him pack, a cold calculation running through my mind. Even if you forged my signature, a loan that size requires a legally commissioned notary public to verify your identity. They have to witness both of us signing the documents in person. Greg turned back to me, his sneer deepening into a look of absolute triumph. He actually thought he was the smartest man in the room. You really think I do not have connections? Have you forgotten where I work? I am a branch manager, Natalie. I process loans all day. I asked Kevin from the commercial lending department to stamp the documents for me. He owed me a massive favor for covering up a compliance issue for him last year. I slipped him a few $100. He stamped his notary seal on the paperwork, and the bank wired the $500,000 into my account 3 days later. It was seamless. I stood completely still. I was absorbing every single detail. Not only had my husband committed blatant mortgage fraud by forging my signature on federal loan documents, but he had just admitted to a conspiracy involving a corrupt bank official. He had handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy him, wrapped in a bow of sheer arrogance. But Greg, I said, maintaining the facade of a terrified wife. If Rachel's deal is dead and the stock crashes, how are we going to pay back the bank? They will foreclose on the house. You committed a felony. Greg's triumphant sneer vanished, replaced instantly by the raw, suffocating panic from the car ride. His face turned red and he lunged forward, grabbing me by the shoulders. His grip was painful, his fingers digging into my skin. Because it was supposed to be a sure thing, he screamed, shaking me slightly. It was guaranteed money. And now it is gone. He let go of me, breathing heavily, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape hatch. That is why we have to fix this. We have to cover the margin call before the bank audits the account. Before I could ask how he planned to magically produce $500,000, the silence of the room was shattered by the sharp, piercing ring of my cell phone sitting on the bed. We both jumped. I picked it up. The caller ID flashed brightly in the dark room. It was my mother. Susan's name glowed like a warning beacon. Before I could even reach for it, Greg lunged across the bed and snatched the phone from my hand. He stared at the screen, his breathing ragged, then shoved the device into his pocket. "You are not answering that right now," he hissed, his voice dropping an octave into something low and menacing. His panic was rapidly calcifying into a cold, desperate cruelty. "We have to figure out how to save my neck first." He stepped toward me, his physical presence suddenly imposing. The man who had been sweating bullets in the car just 10 minutes ago was now trying to physically intimidate me. He backed me against the wall, placing one hand on either side of my head, trapping me. He smelled like fear and bad bourbon. "I am not going to jail, Natalie," he said, his words deliberate and sharp. "And I am not losing this house. But there is a very simple way out of this for both of us. You are going to sell the land." My heart skipped a beat, but my face remained perfectly blank. The land. He was talking about the 50 acres of undeveloped woodland in upstate New York that my grandfather had left specifically to me in his will. Not to Amanda, not to my parents, to me. He had always told me it was my safety net, a piece of the world that belonged entirely to me. Greg had been pestering me to sell it for years so we could remodel the kitchen or buy a boat he could show off to his golf buddies. I stared at him, keeping my voice steady. "That land was an inheritance. It is solely in my name, Greg. It is not community property. I am not selling my grandfather's land to pay off a fraudulent loan you took out behind my back." Greg leaned in closer, his face inches from mine, his lips pulled back into a cruel sneer. "You think you have a choice. Do you really think I am the only one who goes down if the bank forecloses? If I default on this HELOC, it destroys the credit rating tied to this house. It destroys your credit rating. Good luck getting a lease on a garbage apartment with a massive foreclosure on your record. If I lose this house, you are homeless too, sweetheart." He was right about the credit damage, technically. If a massive loan tied to the property defaulted, it would be a nightmare to untangle even with the forged signature. He thought he had me cornered. He thought he could bully me into liquidating my only known asset to save his skin. He had absolutely no idea that I could buy the entire bank he worked for if I felt like it. "You are going to call a realtor first thing tomorrow morning," he ordered, his voice echoing in the small space between us. "You are going to list the land, and you are going to wire the proceeds directly into the brokerage account to cover the margin call. If you fight me on this, I swear to God, I will drag you down with me. I will make sure the bank comes after everything." The phone in his pocket began to ring again. It vibrated loudly, a persistent, angry buzz. Greg cursed, pulling it out and looking at the screen. He answered it this time, his voice instantly changing from a threatening snarl to a sycophantic whine. "Hello, Susan. Yes, we are home." He paused, listening to my mother's voice squawking through the receiver. His expression shifted from arrogance back to sheer panic. He looked at me, his eyes widening. "What do you mean she needs a bailout?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "How much?" Another pause. The color drained from his face all over again. "We will be right there," he said abruptly, hanging up the phone. He shoved the phone back into his pocket and grabbed my arm, his grip bruising. "We have to go back out. Your parents are demanding we come over right now." I tried to yank my arm away, but his grip was too tight. "Why? What happened to Rachel?" Greg practically dragged me toward the bedroom door. "Rachel is facing a massive lawsuit from Apex Media if she cannot salvage the deal or cover the corporate damages. Your sister is having a complete meltdown. Your parents are calling an emergency family meeting. They need cash, Natalie. They need a lot of it." He paused in the hallway, turning back to look at me with a sickeningly triumphant gleam in his eye. "And they know about the land your grandfather left you. It looks like you are going to be selling it whether you want to or not. Now move." He shoved me toward the stairs, forcing me out the door and back into the nightmare. Only this time I was walking into the lion's den fully armed. The drive to my parents' estate took less than 20 minutes, but with Greg sweating and gripping the steering wheel like a vice, it felt like an eternity. He did not speak a single word the entire way. He just kept darting nervous glances at his phone. When we pulled through the wrought iron gates and parked on the circular driveway, the massive colonial house was blazing with lights. It looked less like a family home and more like a corporate tribunal preparing for an execution. Greg was out of the car before I had even unbuckled my seatbelt. I took a deep breath, smoothing my simple dress, and followed him up the sprawling brick steps. I did not feel fear. I felt a cold, calculating sense of anticipation. The moment Greg pushed open the heavy oak front door, the sound of dramatic echoing sobs hit my ears. We walked into the grand living room, and the scene before me was almost comical in its staging. My sister Amanda was collapsed on the center of the plush, white sectional sofa, her face buried in her hands, weeping as if she had just suffered a profound tragedy. Beside her sat Rachel, staring blankly at a crystal tumbler of scotch, looking completely shell-shocked. Her designer blazer was wrinkled, and the arrogant smirk she had worn at dinner was entirely gone. My mother Susan was hovering over Amanda, stroking her hair and murmuring soothing words. My father Richard was pacing back and forth in front of the marble fireplace, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. The air in the room was thick, suffocating, and entirely devoid of any warmth. As soon as I stepped onto the Persian rug, my father stopped pacing. He turned to face me, his expression hardening into stone. "Sit down, Natalie," he commanded. It was not a request. It was an order from a man who was used to absolute obedience. I remained standing. "I am fine right here, Richard. What is this emergency that could not wait until morning?" My father's jaw tightened at my refusal to sit, but he pressed on, his voice booming in the high-ceilinged room. "Rachel's career is in jeopardy. Apex Media is threatening legal action against her for the collapse of the Lumina acquisition. They are claiming gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. If they sue her, they will freeze all of her assets. Amanda's entire life, her home, her security is about to be dragged into a massive corporate legal battle. They need liquid capital immediately to retain a top-tier defense firm and potentially settle the corporate damages before this goes public." I looked at Rachel. The titan of industry who had mocked my internet bill just 2 hours ago was now staring at the floor, waiting for her girlfriend's family to bail her out. That sounds like a terrible situation for Rachel, I said, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. But I still fail to see why Greg and I were summoned here at midnight. Amanda's head snapped up. Her eyes were red, but the glare she shot me was pure venom. Do not play dumb, Natalie. You know exactly why you are here. Greg already told us you are sitting on the deed to Grandpa's land upstate. I shifted my gaze to Greg. He was standing near the doorway, arms crossed, trying to look imposing, but mostly looking like a terrified coward hiding behind my father's authority. He had sold me out before we even walked through the door. My father took a step toward me, adopting a tone of forced reason. We have already contacted a commercial developer who has been eyeing that 50-acre plot for years. He is willing to pay above market value for an expedited cash sale. You are going to sign the deed over to the family trust first thing Monday morning. The funds will be used to protect Amanda and Rachel, and whatever is left can go toward that little banking mess Greg mentioned on the phone. He spoke as if the matter was already settled, as if my inheritance was simply a communal slush fund waiting to be tapped. I looked around the room, at my commanding father, my weeping sister, her disgraced girlfriend, and my treacherous husband. No, I said. The single syllable dropped into the room like a lead weight. My father blinked, genuinely confused. What did you say? I said no. I am not selling my grandfather's land. I am certainly not selling it to fund the legal defense of a woman who just spent an entire dinner humiliating me. Her corporate failures are her own problem. The silence that followed was deafening. Then my mother snapped. She lunged forward, her face twisting into an ugly mask of pure rage. "How dare you!" Susan shrieked, her voice echoing off the walls. "How dare you be so incredibly selfish! You have never done a single useful thing in your life. You dropped out of school, you sit around doing nothing. Your sister is facing ruin, and you want to hoard a piece of dirt you do not even use. You owe Amanda. She is the only one in this family with a real future. She is the one who belongs in our world. You are just a pathetic disappointment who got lucky with a will. You will sign that paper, or so help me God, I will make sure you are dead to this family." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling absolutely nothing. No heartbreak, no betrayal, just a profound sense of clarity. For 33 years I had chased her approval, and now standing in her immaculate living room, I realized it was entirely worthless. Before I could respond, Rachel abruptly sat up on the sofa. She wiped her eyes, her demeanor shifting from defeated to venomous. She picked up her phone from the coffee table, her manicured fingers tapping furiously. "You think this is a game?" Natalie, Rachel sneered. "You think you can just walk away while my life collapses? Do you have any idea the kind of legal power Apex Media wields? They will bury us all." She hit a button and placed the phone on the glass table. A man's crisp, authoritative voice filled the room, echoing slightly through the speakerphone. "This is Richard Belmont, senior partner at Belmont Legal. Am I on speaker with the relevant parties?" "Yes, Richard," Rachel said, her voice dripping with malice. "My sister-in-law is refusing to cooperate, and her husband is proving to be entirely useless." The lawyer cleared his throat, adopting a tone designed to crush the listener. "Greg, I understand you utilized confidential insider information provided by my client to execute high-risk margin trades. Since those trades have failed due to unforeseen corporate shifts at Apex Media, you are now a massive liability. If your wife does not liquidate her assets immediately to cover the financial damages my client is about to incur, we will file a civil suit against you for corporate espionage and unauthorized trading. We will drain every cent you have, we will seize your home, and we will ensure you never work in the financial sector again. Do you understand me?" Greg let out a pathetic whimper. He looked at me, his eyes wide with sheer terror. "Natalie, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "They will destroy us. You have to sign the deed. They have an entire team of corporate sharks waiting to tear my life apart." I looked at the phone, tempted to ask the brilliant corporate lawyer how he planned to sue someone over an insider trading tip without implicating his own client in a federal crime. It was a bluff and intimidation tactic meant to terrify a mid-level bank manager who was completely out of his depth. And it was working perfectly on Greg. My father slammed his hand down on the mantelpiece, making the crystal ornaments rattle. Enough of this nonsense. Greg, put the loan documents on the table right now. Let us see exactly how much debt we are dealing with so we can draft the property transfer agreement. I will not have my family dragged into a public scandal because you do not know how to handle your wife. Greg practically tripped over his own feet, rushing to his briefcase. He pulled out the thick manila folder containing the forged documents and tossed it onto the glass coffee table right next to Rachel's phone. At that exact moment, the heavy front door swung open. Footsteps echoed in the foyer, followed by my brother Jason's voice. "What is going on?" Mom called saying it was a life or death emergency. Jason walked into the living room looking disheveled in a college sweatshirt. Right behind him was his wife, Nia. Nia was a striking African-American woman, possessing an intellect as sharp as a scalpel. She was a top-tier commercial real estate broker in the city, the kind of woman who negotiated million-dollar leases before her morning coffee. She was dressed impeccably in a tailored camel coat, her keen eyes instantly scanning the room and assessing the bizarre tense tableau. Nia, my mother, sighed, waving a dismissive hand. "This is a private family matter. Jason, tell your wife to wait in the kitchen." Nia did not move a single muscle toward the kitchen. Instead, she stepped further into the room, her gaze locking onto the manila folder sitting on the coffee table. The bold letters of Greg's bank were printed across the top, followed by the words "Home Equity Line of Credit Agreement." "Private family matter," Nia repeated, her voice smooth but carrying a dangerous edge. "It looks like a financial intervention." She walked right past my glaring mother and picked up the folder. Greg reached out as if to snatch it back, but Nia shot him a look so freezing he immediately withdrew his hand. She opened the folder, her eyes rapidly scanning the dense legal text. As a commercial broker, she read complex property contracts for breakfast. For a few seconds, the only sound in the room was the rustling of paper as she flipped to the signature pages. Then Nia stopped. She tilted her head, her brow furrowing slightly as she examined the final page. She looked at Greg, then at me, and finally back to the document. "Greg," Nia said, her tone deceptively calm. "When exactly did Natalie sign these documents?" Greg swallowed, hard beads of sweat forming on his upper lip again. "What does it matter? She signed them. We got the loan. Now she has to sell the land to pay it back so we do not lose everything." Nia let out a short, humorless laugh. She tossed the folder back onto the table, the heavy thud cutting through the tension. "It matters, Greg, because I know for a fact Natalie was in New York City with me for a commercial property summit on the exact date stamped next to her signature by your bank notary. I have the hotel receipts, the flight logs, and the conference registration to prove it. She was 600 miles away when this document was supposedly signed in person." The room went dead silent, the kind of silence that precedes a massive explosion. Nia crossed her arms, staring Greg down like a predator cornering its prey. "You did not just take out a bad loan, Greg. You forged your wife's signature on a legal deed and bribed a notary to push it through. That is not a private family matter. That is federal mortgage fraud. And if you think you can force her to sell her inheritance to cover up a felony, you are out of your mind." Greg stumbled backward, knocking into the heavy armchair as if Nia had physically struck him. His face flushed a deep, ugly crimson. "You do not know what you are talking about," he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at her. "It is not fraud if the bank gets paid back. I am the branch manager. I have authorization overrides. It was an internal liquidity maneuver meant to bridge a temporary capital gap. It happens all the time in the industry." Nia did not even blink. "An internal liquidity maneuver," she repeated, her tone dripping with absolute disdain. "Greg, I hold a federal broker license. Do not try to dress up a felony in corporate buzzwords to make yourself feel better. You forged a signature on a federally backed loan document. That violates Title 18, Section 1344 of the United States Code, bank fraud. And since you transferred the funds across state lines into a brokerage account to buy Apex Media call options, you added wire fraud to the list. If the FDIC audits your branch, you are looking at a mandatory minimum of 5 to 10 years in a federal penitentiary." Greg opened his mouth to argue, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. The legal reality of his actions, stripped of his arrogant delusions, was finally crushing him under its massive weight. Nia turned her sharp gaze away from the pathetic man shivering by the armchair and looked directly at my father. Richard stood frozen by the fireplace, his face pale. "And you," Nia said, her voice echoing with righteous anger, "you are supposed to be the patriarch of this family, a respected businessman. Yet you summon your daughter here in the middle of the night to force her to sell her grandfather's land to cover up this exact crime. Why? To protect Rachel, a woman who is not even a member of this family, who made a catastrophic error in a corporate acquisition. You are willing to make Natalie homeless and complicit in a federal cover-up just to save your golden child's girlfriend from a civil lawsuit." My mother stepped forward, her face twisted in an ugly, condescending sneer. She had always hated Nia. Susan could not stand the fact that Jason had married an independent, highly educated black woman who refused to bow to our family's toxic hierarchy. "Lower your voice in my house, Nia," my mother hissed, clutching her pearl necklace as if shielding herself. "You are completely overstepping your boundaries. But then again, I suppose we cannot expect someone from your background to understand the nuances of how high society families handle internal matters. We protect our own. We do not run to the authorities and cry fraud over a simple paperwork error." Nia squared her shoulders, towering over my mother both physically and morally. "My background?" Nia asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Do you mean my background as the daughter of 2 civil rights lawyers, or my background as the top commercial broker in the state? Because both of those backgrounds taught me the difference between loyalty and criminal conspiracy, Susan." Amanda jumped up from the sofa, her face blotchy from crying, but her eyes burning with malice. "Do not speak to my mother that way," Amanda shrieked, marching toward Nia. "You have always been so aggressive. Ever since Jason brought you into this house, you have tried to act like you are better than us. You are not one of us. You will never be one of us. You just married my brother for his money, and now you are trying to tear this family apart because you are jealous of Rachel's success." The sheer audacity of Amanda's words hung in the heavy air. Jason did not have any money when he met Nia. Nia was the exact person who paid off his staggering student loans, but facts never mattered to my family when they felt threatened. They resorted to the only weapons they had left: racism, classism, and blind entitlement. "You simply do not understand how this family works," my mother added, crossing her arms defensively. "We make sacrifices for the greater good. Rachel is on the verge of becoming a vice president. Amanda is accustomed to a certain standard of living. Greg made a mistake, yes, but Natalie owes it to her sister to fix it. That is what families do. They clean up each other's messes. If you cannot comprehend that, then perhaps you should leave our house immediately." Nia let out a soft, melodic laugh that sent a chill down my spine. It was the laugh of a woman who had just been handed the keys to her enemy's destruction. She looked at Amanda, then at my mother, her expression utterly fearless. "You think you can intimidate me with your country club pedigree?" Nia said, her voice cutting through the tension like a hot knife through butter. "I deal with billionaires who could buy and sell this entire zip code before breakfast. You are just a bunch of desperate people trying to protect a fragile illusion of wealth." My mother gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. But before she could unleash another barrage of insults, Jason stepped directly in front of Nia. My brother had always been the peacemaker of the family, the one who kept his head down to avoid the crossfire. But tonight, the peacemaker was dead and gone. "Do not say another word to my wife," Jason roared. His voice was so loud and commanding that even my father flinched backward. "I have spent my entire life watching you people tear Natalie down just to inflate Amanda's massive ego. I watched you treat her like a second-class citizen in her own home, and now you want to drag Nia into your toxic, twisted games." "Jason, how dare you speak to your mother that way?" My father bellowed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "We are trying to save this family from financial ruin." "You are trying to save a criminal and a failure," Jason shot back. He pointed a furious finger at Greg, who cowered against the armchair, and then at Rachel, who glared at him from the sofa. "Greg committed federal fraud. Rachel botched a multi-million-dollar acquisition because she is arrogant and incompetent, and instead of holding them accountable, you are trying to force Natalie to sell her inheritance to clean up their mess. You are all absolutely pathetic. Amanda let out a piercing shriek. You are taking her side. You are taking the side of this outsider over your own flesh and blood. You are just as useless as Natalie. Jason turned to our sister, his eyes filled with a cold, absolute disgust. I would rather be useless than be a parasite, Amanda. You have never worked a hard day in your life. You just latch on to whoever can fund your lifestyle. And the second Rachel's money dries up, we all know you will drop her just like you dropped everyone else. The room erupted into total chaos. My father was shouting at Jason, threatening to write him out of the will and strip him of his trust fund. My mother was sobbing hysterically, screaming that Nia had brainwashed her only son. Rachel was yelling legal threats, claiming she would sue Jason for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Even Greg tried to speak up, muttering that Jason did not understand corporate finance, only to be immediately shut down when Jason stepped aggressively in his direction and dared him to say it again. While the screaming match consumed the room, drawing every eye toward my brother and my father, Nia stepped smoothly backward. She moved with the quiet grace of someone who knew exactly how to navigate a chaotic battlefield. She positioned herself right beside me, so close that our shoulders were nearly touching. Under the cover of my mother's hysterical sobbing and my father's booming threats, I felt a slight pressure against my right side. Nia's hand slipped into the deep pocket of my coat. Her fingers brushed against mine for a brief second, leaving behind a small, hard object. It was a metal flash drive. Nia leaned in, pretending to adjust the lapel of her camel coat. Her lips barely moved, her voice a sharp, urgent whisper, meant only for my ears. I pulled the title records and the wire transfers from the county clerk and the bank database. Greg is not just making bad trades. He is laundering the money through a shell company. I put everything on that drive. Do not let them intimidate you, Natalie. Burn them to the ground. I closed my hand around the cold metal of the flash drive in my pocket. A surge of absolute power rushed through my veins. Nia gave me a subtle, knowing nod, then stepped away from me, rejoining the fray. "We are done here," Jason announced, his voice slicing through the cacophony of insults. "We are completely done. Do not call us. Do not invite us to your holidays. And if any of you try to contact Nia again, I will personally hand Greg's loan documents over to the federal authorities myself." Jason grabbed Nia's hand. Without looking back, they walked out of the living room, their footsteps echoing sharply against the hardwood floor. A few seconds later, the heavy oak front door slammed shut with a finality that shook the windows. The silence that rushed into the room was heavy and suffocating. The screaming had stopped. The sudden absence of Jason and Nia left a massive void, and all the chaotic energy in the room slowly refocused. My father took a deep breath, smoothing his tie. My mother wiped her tears, her face hardening into a mask of pure resentment. Amanda and Rachel stood up from the sofa, moving closer to my parents. Greg slowly peeled himself away from the armchair, stepping into the circle. They all turned to look at me. The momentary distraction was over. Jason and Nia were gone, and I was left standing completely alone in the center of the Persian rug. The wolves had regrouped, and they were ready to feast. My father was the first to break the heavy silence. He marched over to the antique mahogany desk in the far corner of the room, yanked open the heavy top drawer, and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents bound by a stiff blue cover. It was the deed transfer. He walked back to the center of the room, his heavy footsteps thudding against the floorboards, and stopped just inches from where I stood. With a sharp, aggressive motion, he practically shoved the documents right into my chest, forcing me to either take them or let them fall to the ground. "Sign it!" he demanded, his voice devoid of any paternal warmth. It was the exact voice he used when firing a subordinate at his firm. Jason's little theatrical exit changes absolutely nothing about the reality of this situation. You are going to sign this property transfer right now, or you can consider yourself permanently severed from this family. No inheritance, no support, no contact whatsoever. Greg eagerly stepped forward, materializing at my right side like a desperate animal. He reached into his suit jacket, pulled out a silver ballpoint pen, and held it out to me. His hand was trembling so violently that the metal casing clicked rhythmically against his gold wedding band. "Just do it, Natalie," Greg pleaded, his voice cracking under the immense pressure. "Stop being stubborn. We have to cover the margin call before the bank audits my branch. If you just sign the paper, everything goes back to normal. We can fix this mess and move on." My mother moved to my left, completing the physical barricade around me. "Do not be a fool," Susan sneered, her eyes raking over my simple dress with sheer disgust. "You heard what Rachel's corporate lawyer just said on the phone. Do you really want to spend the rest of your miserable life fighting a massive media conglomerate in court just to keep a useless patch of dirt upstate? You owe your sister this sacrifice. Take the pen and sign the paper." Amanda sniffled loudly from the sofa, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "It is the only decent thing you can possibly do after the way your husband ruined everything for Rachel." I looked down at the thick stack of papers resting in my hands. The heavy cardstock felt rough against my skin. I read the bold black lettering printed across the top page: "Irrevocable transfer of real property." Below it, a blank line waited for my signature to sign away the only thing my grandfather had given me to protect me from these exact people. I looked at the silver pen trembling in Greg's hand. I looked at my father's demanding, authoritarian glare. I looked at my mother's cold, condescending sneer. Then I felt the cold metal of the flash drive resting deep in my pocket. Nia was right. It was finally time to burn them to the ground. I did not take the pen. Instead, I gripped the top of the thick legal packet tightly with both hands. A rush of pure electrifying adrenaline flooded my veins, making my vision razor-sharp and my heart beat with a steady, powerful rhythm. I twisted my wrists in opposite directions with all the strength I had. The sound of the heavy cardstock tearing echoed through the grand living room like a gunshot. It took significant physical effort, but I ripped the entire document straight down the middle. I let the two destroyed halves flutter to the Persian rug, the pieces scattering across the intricate woven patterns right at my father's expensive leather shoes. My father physically recoiled, his mouth falling open in sheer, unadulterated disbelief. My mother let out a high-pitched, strangled gasp, clutching her chest as if she were having a heart attack. Greg stared at the torn pieces of paper on the floor, as if I had just murdered his only child right in front of him. But it was Rachel who truly lost her mind. She sprang up from the sofa, her face contorted with absolute unhinged fury. She stormed toward me, her designer heels sinking aggressively into the carpet. "You stupid, arrogant little brat," she screamed, pointing a perfectly manicured finger right in my face. "You just made the biggest mistake of your pathetic life. I am going to destroy you. I will use every single legal resource at Apex Media to drag you and your criminal husband through the dirt. I am going to bury you in legal fees until you are begging to live on the street." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at Rachel's flushed, furious face, and for the first time in my entire life, I smiled a genuine, radiant smile in that house. I met her eyes with absolute ice. "How can you bury the person who just fired you?" The words hung in the air, freezing time itself. Rachel stopped screaming. Her arm, pointing a manicured finger at my face, slowly lowered to her side. Her expression morphed from unhinged fury to uncomprehending blankness. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out my iPad Pro. I did not rush. I let the silence stretch, savoring my own calm breathing, while the room suffocated in confusion. The grandfather clock ticked loudly, marking the final seconds of their reign over me. I pressed the home button, unlocking the device. I opened the secure portal my lead developer had custom-built exclusively for me. I bypassed the secondary firewall, typed my master passcode, and watched the large screen illuminate with the navy blue and silver logo of Lumina Digital. "You are insane," Amanda whispered from the sofa. "What are you talking about, Natalie?" I ignored her completely. I tapped the screen once more with absolute precision, pulling up the main executive dashboard. I walked forward, stepping directly over the torn property deeds scattered on the Persian rug. I stopped in front of Rachel and held the iPad up so the glowing screen was perfectly level with her eyes. "Read it, Rachel." I said, my voice cold and commanding. Since you are the Mergers and Acquisitions Director at Apex Media, you should be familiar with this corporate interface. Read the official name displayed at the top left corner. Rachel's eyes darted to the screen. Her pupils dilated so fast it looked painful. She stared at the bold white lettering sitting above the company logo. Founder and Chief Executive Officer Natalie. Her jaw dropped. A faint wheezing sound escaped her throat, but she could not form a single cohesive word. Her corporate facade shattered completely. I swiped my finger across the glass, moving to the Live Financial Overview tab. The screen refreshed instantly, displaying the current valuation of the company based on our most recent quarter of global revenue. $40 million. The massive numbers glowed brightly in green, a stark contrast to Greg's forged $500,000 loan. The line graphs showing our growth spiked upward. I swiped one more time, pulling up the secured communications log. The most recent entry was flagged in bright red. Apex Media Acquisition Offer. Status terminated. Reason hostile and unethical buyer conduct. Timestamp exactly 42 minutes ago. Right when we were sitting at Le Bouclier eating dinner. Rachel stumbled backward as if the glowing screen of the iPad had physically burned her skin. The back of her knees hit the glass coffee table and she collapsed heavily onto the sofa next to Amanda. She looked like all the warm blood had been instantly drained from her body, leaving her pale. She clutched her chest with a trembling hand, her breathing becoming incredibly rapid. She looked like she might actually faint, right there in the living room. "What is that?" my father demanded, stepping closer to get a better look at the screen. He adjusted his glasses, frantically scanning the numbers, the legal watermarks, and the corporate logos. His imposing authoritarian posture crumbled instantly before my very eyes. 40 million. Founder. Natalie, what exactly is this? It is my little blogging hobby, Richard, I replied calmly, throwing his own condescending words right back in his face. The one you told me not to ask you for a loan to support? The one Amanda called a pathetic excuse to stay home in sweatpants. I slowly turned my head to look directly at my husband. Greg was pressed flat against the hallway wall, staring at me as if I had revealed a terrifying monster underneath my skin. "And it is the company you tried to use to make a quick buck, Greg. The company you risked our house on because you thought you were vastly smarter than me." Total silence descended upon the grand living room once again. It was a completely different kind of silence this time. It was not the silence of judgment or anger. It was the crushing, suffocating silence of absolute awe and sheer terror. The arrogant family that had spent 33 years treating me like a disposable burden was entirely paralyzed. They were looking at a woman they did not recognize, a woman possessing significantly more wealth, power, and leverage than all of them combined. My mother stood frozen, her hands shaking uncontrollably as the reality of what had just happened penetrated her delusion. She had just threatened to permanently disown the most successful person in our entire bloodline. Rachel finally managed to draw a ragged, shaking breath. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic pleading. "You," she whispered, her voice breaking completely. "It was you the whole time. You were the ghost." "Yes, Rachel," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of sympathy. "I am the ghost, and you just spent the last 3 hours proving exactly why I never wanted to do business with Apex Media." Rachel opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She just stared at the iPad, her lucrative career dissolving before her eyes. Suddenly, the heavy silence was broken by a sharp, almost hysterical laugh. It was Greg. He pushed himself off the hallway wall, his previous terror evaporating like water on a hot stove. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting wildly between me and the glowing screen. 40 million! Greg repeated, his voice cracking with a sudden manic energy. "Natalie, $40 million. He took a step toward me, his posture completely transforming. The cowering, panicked man who had just tried to force me to sell my inheritance was gone. In his place was a man looking at a winning lottery ticket. "Babe," he breathed out, an arrogant smile stretching across his face. "Why did you not tell me? We are rich. We are actually rich. I do not have to worry about the margin call anymore. You can just pay off the bank tomorrow morning. We can pay off the house. We can buy a new house." The absolute lack of remorse was staggering. He had forged my signature, committed federal wire fraud, verbally abused me, and threatened to leave me homeless. Yet the moment he saw the valuation of my company, all of his crimes were instantly forgiven in his own mind. He honestly believed my money was his money. He reached out to grab my shoulders, acting as if we were a triumphant team. I took a sharp step back, dodging his hands. "Do not touch me, Greg," I warned. Before Greg could process my rejection, my father cleared his throat. The transformation of Richard was even more nauseating than Greg's. My father straightened his posture, adjusting his expensive tie, and plastered on a smile that I had only ever seen him use on wealthy clients. "Well," Richard said, his booming voice suddenly adopting a jovial paternal warmth that made my stomach churn. "I must admit, Natalie, you have managed to completely blindside us. A $40 million valuation. That is an incredible achievement. Truly remarkable." My mother, Susan, stepped forward. Her previous viciousness completely erased, as if she had not just threatened to disown me 5 minutes ago. She clasped her hands together, her eyes shining with a predatory glint. "Oh, Natalie," she cooed, "I always knew you had a hidden genius in you. I knew you did not drop out of grad school for nothing. You were just biding your time building something spectacular. I am so incredibly proud of you, sweetheart." Sweetheart? The word tasted like poison. I stared at them, absolutely sickened by the psychological whiplash. They were not proud of me. They were proud of the number on the screen. They worshipped at the altar of wealth, and suddenly I was the highest priestess in the room. Amanda, who had been sitting in stunned silence, finally stood up. She looked at Rachel's devastated face, then looked at me, her mind clearly racing to find a way to salvage her own luxurious lifestyle. "Wait," Amanda said, her voice trembling but gaining confidence. "If you are the CEO, Natalie, then you can just reverse the termination. You can accept Rachel's buyout offer right now." My father shook his head, holding up a hand. "No, Amanda, think bigger. Why would Natalie sell to Apex Media now? We do not need outside buyers when the asset is already in the family." Richard walked toward me, his eyes locked onto the iPad. He was already carving up my empire in his mind. "Listen to me, Natalie," my father said, using his most persuasive corporate tone. "Rachel lost her promotion tonight, and Greg made a very foolish mistake with his investments. But we can turn this entire situation around into a massive win for the family. Since you own the company outright, the solution is incredibly simple." He paused, smiling as if he were bestowing a great gift upon me. "You give Amanda a 20% equity stake in Lumina Digital," Richard proposed seamlessly. "It is more than fair compensation for the Apex deal falling through. Amanda can bring Rachel on as a senior consultant to handle your future acquisitions. Then you issue a small dividend payout to cover Greg's loan with the bank. We keep the wealth consolidated, we protect Greg from federal charges, and we elevate the entire family's financial standing. It is brilliant." I stood completely frozen in the center of the room. The sheer audacity of his words sickened me to my absolute core. I looked at my father, who genuinely believed he had orchestrated a corporate rescue. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed off the high ceiling. "You want me to give Amanda 20% of a $40 million company?" I asked, my voice dripping with pure disbelief. "You want me to employ the woman who spent the last 3 hours insulting my intelligence? And you expect me to cover federal mortgage fraud for a man who forged my signature and threatened to leave me homeless?" My mother stepped forward. "Now, Natalie, do not be difficult. We must make compromises." "There is no family legacy, Susan," I snapped. "There is just a group of greedy, toxic parasites looking for a new host. You get nothing. Amanda gets nothing. Rachel remains fired. And Greg." I turned my entire focus to my husband. "And Greg," I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "You are getting divorce papers. I am filing first thing Monday morning. You can figure out how to explain your forged loan documents to a federal judge completely on your own. I am done with you." The room plunged into a suffocating silence once again. But this time the reaction from Greg was entirely different. The pathetic, cowering man who had begged me to save him was instantly replaced by something far more sinister. The realization that I was actually leaving him, that I was taking the $40 million and walking out the door, flipped a switch in his brain. His demeanor turned absolutely lethal. His face hardened into a mask of pure malice. He did not cry or beg. He slowly reached into his tailored suit pocket and pulled out his cell phone. "You think it is that easy?" Natalie Gregg asked, his voice low and vibrating with a terrifying confidence. "You think you can just pack a bag, take your little secret empire and leave me holding the bag with the bank? You are forgetting who you are married to. I work in finance. I know exactly how marital assets function." He tapped the screen of his phone, dialing a number from his contacts. He held the phone up, ensuring everyone in the room could see what he was doing. "I am calling David. He is the most ruthless corporate divorce attorney in the city. He handles high asset liquidations for the bank's top executives." My father's eyes lit up with renewed hope. "Greg, what are you doing?" "I am securing my half," Greg stated coldly, pressing the phone to his ear. He looked right at me, his eyes filled with a predatory, calculating greed. "Did you forget where we live, Natalie? We live in a community property state. We got married 6 years ago. You built this company 5 years ago. That means every single line of code, every single dollar of revenue, and every single share of equity was created during the course of our marriage." Amanda gasped from the sofa, a wicked, delighted smile spreading across her tear-stained face. She immediately grasped the legal implication. Greg lowered the phone slightly as it rang, stepping closer to me. "We do not have a prenuptial agreement, sweetheart. You never thought you needed one because you were just playing around on your laptop. But the law does not care if you kept it a secret. The law says that any wealth generated while we are legally bound is split straight down the middle. I do not care if you are the CEO. I do not care if you did all the work. You owe me $20 million. The air in the room shifted dramatically. The power dynamic which I had seized just moments ago was suddenly contested. My parents, who had just been rejected by me, instantly rallied behind Greg's legal revelation. He was no longer the criminal who forged a document. He was their new ticket to the wealth I had just denied them. Greg pressed the phone back to his ear as the line connected. "David." "It is Greg. I know it is extremely late, but I need you to file an emergency injunction tomorrow morning. My wife has been hiding a marital asset valued at $40 million, and we are filing for an immediate dissolution of marriage. I need everything frozen before she can move the funds." He hung up the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. He stood tall, his chest puffed out, surrounded by my nodding, approving family. He brazenly demanded 50% of everything I had bled to build over 5 years. He genuinely thought he had me backed into a tight legal corner from which there was absolutely no escape. Greg slipped the phone back into his pocket, a terrifying smile stretching across his face. He looked around the room, making eye contact with my father, my mother, and finally Amanda. The dynamic had completely shifted. They were no longer a fractured group of panicked individuals. They had suddenly formed a united front bound together by the intoxicating scent of $40 million. "David is drafting this paperwork right now," Greg announced, his voice echoing with unearned authority. "By 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, a judge will sign an emergency ex parte order. Every single bank account tied to Lumina Digital, every corporate credit card, every vendor payment system will be entirely frozen. You will not be able to buy a cup of coffee with that company's money, Natalie. You are completely locked out of your own empire until the court decides how to split my half." I maintained my composed exterior, though internally my mind was rapidly calculating the variables. He was playing a very aggressive hand. In a standard divorce involving hidden assets, an injunction was a standard tactic. But Greg was not dealing with a standard asset, and he was certainly not dealing with a standard wife. Rachel, who had been sitting pale and defeated on the sofa just moments ago, suddenly sat up straight. The color returned to her cheeks. Her predatory corporate instincts kicked back into overdrive. She looked at Greg, her eyes narrowing as a new ruthless strategy formed in her mind. "Greg," Rachel said, her voice sharp and calculating, "corporate divorces involving assets of this magnitude can take years to litigate. Natalie will drag this out. She will try to drain the company's value just to spite you. You are going to need a massive legal war chest to fight her. Belmont Legal charges $1,000 an hour. Can you afford that?" Greg hesitated, his arrogant smile faltering for a fraction of a second. I will use the house equity. I will leverage the bank. No, Amanda interrupted, standing up from the sofa. She walked over to Rachel, placing a hand on her girlfriend's shoulder, then looked directly at Greg. You do not need to leverage anything. We will fund your lawsuit. My father nodded eagerly, stepping into the circle. Absolutely. The family trust can provide the legal retainer. We will hire the best forensic accountants in the state to tear through every single ledger of Lumina Digital. We will make sure Natalie cannot hide a single dime from the court. I watched my own family conspire to destroy me right in my parents' living room. It was a surreal, sickening display of pure greed. My own flesh and blood were actively bankrolling my husband's divorce lawsuit against me. But there is a condition, Rachel added, standing up to join them. She crossed her arms, looking at me with absolute venom, then turned her attention back to Greg. When we win the injunction, the court will likely appoint a receiver to manage the company's daily operations while the assets are being divided. We will push the judge to appoint me. I will step in as the interim CEO of Lumina Digital. I will restructure the board, absorb the Apex Media acquisition protocols, and prepare the company for a proper public sale. In exchange for funding your legal fees, Amanda and I get a controlling interest of your $20 million settlement. Greg did not even blink. He was so consumed by his hatred for me and his desperation for wealth that he was willing to make a deal with the devil. Deal, he said, shaking Rachel's hand firmly. My mother clapped her hands together, a terrifying smile lighting up her face. It is settled then. This is exactly what I meant about families protecting their own. We will navigate this minor setback and come out stronger than ever. Natalie, since you clearly have no intention of cooperating with this family, I think it is best you leave our house. You have caused enough disruption for one night. I looked at the group of them. My father, my mother, my sister, her girlfriend, and the man I had slept next to for 6 years. They had formed a cartel of pure entitlement, completely convinced that they had outmaneuvered me. They thought they had cornered the naive, quiet girl who wore cheap clothes and avoided conflict. I picked up my tote bag from the floor and slid the iPad securely inside. I did not say a word. I simply turned around and walked toward the grand foyer. The sound of my heels clicked rhythmically against the hardwood floor. Just as I placed my hand on the heavy brass doorknob, Greg's voice called out from the living room, dripping with absolute malice and unearned victory. Have a safe drive home, sweetheart. And thank you. You worked for 5 years in the shadows just to make us millionaires. I opened the front door, stepping out into the cool night air. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, sealing them inside their fortress of delusion. I walked down the brick steps toward my car, pulling my phone from my pocket. It was time to make a phone call of my own. I sat in the driver's seat of my car, the engine idling in the quiet suburban street. I pulled up a contact I had saved under a fake name for years and pressed call. The phone rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. Mr. Caldwell, I said, watching the lights turn off one by one in my parents' house. It is Natalie. Greg knows about the company and he is filing for divorce. I need you in Chicago tomorrow. The line was quiet for a brief moment before he replied with absolute certainty. I will be on the first flight in the morning. Prepare the original trust documents and do not panic. Exactly 2 weeks later, the crisp autumn wind whipped against the floor-to-ceiling windows of a high-rise in downtown Chicago. The massive glass-walled conference room belonged to Belmont Legal, the most expensive and cutthroat corporate firm in the city. The mahogany table in the center of the room was large enough to land a small aircraft, highly polished and reflecting the gray city skyline. Sitting on one side of the massive table was a tribunal of pure, unadulterated greed. Greg sat in the middle, wearing a brand-new custom-tailored suit that he undoubtedly bought on credit, fully expecting a $20 million payday to cover the bill. He looked smug, but the dark circles under his eyes betrayed the immense stress of his pending federal mortgage fraud investigation. To his left sat Amanda and Rachel. They were dressed in matching designer power suits, sipping sparkling water and whispering to each other like two lottery winners waiting to collect their oversized check. They had clearly spent the last 14 days mentally spending my money. To Greg's right sat David, the ruthless divorce attorney he had called from my parents' living room. David possessed the cold, calculating eyes of a shark and a smile that never quite reached his face. He had spent the last 2 weeks filing aggressive motions, serving me with subpoenas, and attempting to freeze every financial account connected to my name. I sat directly across from them. I was not wearing Target today. I wore a tailored midnight blue suit, my hair pulled back in a sharp, sleek style. Beside me sat Mr. Caldwell, my lead corporate attorney. He was an older gentleman with silver hair and a quiet, unassuming demeanor that completely masked the fact that he was one of the most brilliant legal minds in the country. Unlike Greg's aggressive bulldog, Mr. Caldwell did not need to bark to prove he could bite. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. David cleared his throat, adjusting the gold cuffs on his sleeves, and opened a thick leather binder. "Let us skip the pleasantries," David began, his voice echoing sharply in the glass room. "We are all busy professionals. My client, Greg, is seeking an equitable dissolution of the marriage. As we have clearly outlined in our filings, Lumina Digital was conceived, built, and monetized during the course of this marriage in a community property state. We have requested a full forensic audit, and we have filed for an injunction to place the company under an independent receivership until the assets are divided." Rachel leaned forward slightly, unable to hide the predatory gleam in her eyes. The independent receivership she was so desperately angling to control. David continued, his tone dripping with practiced condescension. "Now we understand that a drawn-out legal battle would be catastrophic for a digital media company like Lumina. Your proprietary algorithms, your vendor contracts, your entire operational framework would be subject to public discovery. Advertisers pull out when there is instability. Shareholders get nervous. The brand value plummets. We do not want to destroy the company, Natalie. We simply want what is legally and rightfully owed to my client." Greg adjusted his expensive tie, leaning back in his leather chair with an air of absolute victory. "We are giving you an easy way out," he added, his voice laced with the same malice I had heard 2 weeks ago. "You can avoid the audits, the public scandal, and the courts entirely." David reached into his leather binder and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He slid it across the smooth expanse of the mahogany table. The papers stopped exactly in front of Mr. Caldwell. "This is a final settlement offer," David stated, folding his hands on the table. "It is incredibly generous given the circumstances. Greg will accept a one-time lump sum payment of $20 million. He will also retain sole ownership of the marital home, free and clear of any encumbrances. In exchange, he will relinquish any future claims to Lumina Digital, its subsidiaries, and its intellectual property. You sign this today and we walk away. You refuse, and we will drown you in endless, crippling litigation until your little empire goes bankrupt." Amanda smirked, picking up her glass of sparkling water. "It is a good deal, Natalie. You should take it before Greg decides he wants monthly spousal support too." I did not even touch the settlement offer. I did not even look at the papers. I simply leaned back in my chair, resting my hands on the armrests, and allowed a perfectly relaxed, genuine smile to spread across my face. I looked at Greg, taking in his fake confidence in his expensive new suit. He was so sure he had cornered me. They had played their hand exactly as I knew they would. They were loud, aggressive, and completely blind to the absolute legal nightmare they had just proudly walked into. I looked at Mr. Caldwell. He did not look intimidated by the threat of endless litigation. In fact, he looked mildly amused, as if he were watching children play with toy swords. Mr. Caldwell finally leaned forward. He did not touch the thick settlement document David had so confidently slid across the table. Instead, he folded his hands neatly in front of him and looked directly at the opposing counsel. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a polite conversational volume, yet it carried the undeniable weight of absolute certainty. "I must commend your enthusiasm, David." Mr. Caldwell began, a faint, dry smile touching the corners of his mouth. "It takes a certain amount of reckless bravery to file an emergency ex parte injunction without conducting even the most rudimentary preliminary asset search. You have drafted a beautiful set of demands. Unfortunately, They are based on a fundamental misunderstanding of corporate ownership. David scoffed, crossing his arms defensively. There is no misunderstanding, Caldwell. We know the company is valued at $40 million. We know your client is the sole founder and acting chief executive. It operates within a community property state. The law is incredibly clear on marital assets. Mr. Caldwell reached into his sleek leather briefcase sitting on the floor beside him. He did not pull out a massive binder like David. He pulled out a single thin manila folder. He placed it on the mahogany table and pushed it gently toward the center. The law on marital assets is indeed very clear, Mr. Caldwell agreed smoothly. However, the law regarding irrevocable trusts is even clearer. David froze. The confident smirk completely vanished from his face. His eyes darted from Mr. Caldwell to the thin folder resting on the table. Mr. Caldwell continued, his tone methodical and precise. Lumina Digital is not a limited liability company owned by Natalie. It is not an S corporation, nor is it a sole proprietorship. Lumina Digital is a corporate entity entirely owned by the Horizon Blind Irrevocable Trust, which is legally domiciled in the state of Delaware. Greg leaned forward, his brow furrowing in confusion. He looked at David, then back at Mr. Caldwell. What does that mean? Greg demanded, his voice tinged with a sudden sharp panic. It does not matter where it is registered. She built it while we were married. I am entitled to half. David did not answer his client. Instead, the ruthless divorce attorney slowly reached out and opened the manila folder. He stared at the documents inside. The heavy watermarked paper bore the official seal of the Delaware Secretary of State. Mr. Caldwell turned his attention to Greg, treating him like a slow student who had just failed a basic exam. It matters entirely, Greg, because the Horizon Trust was legally established and fully funded exactly 14 months before you and Natalie signed your marriage certificate. Since the trust is irrevocable, Natalie legally relinquished direct ownership of the assets the moment it was formed. She does not own Lumina Digital. She is merely the primary beneficiary of the trust, which is managed by a third-party fiduciary. The blood drained completely from David's face. He looked like a man who had just stepped out of an airplane and realized he forgot his parachute. He flipped through the pages frantically, his eyes scanning the dates, the signatures, and the impenetrable legal structures that Mr. Caldwell had meticulously drafted years ago. Therefore, Mr. Caldwell concluded, leaning back in his chair with a look of supreme satisfaction, there are no marital assets to divide. The company was not created during your marriage. The equity was not generated during your marriage. Natalie's role as CEO is essentially that of an employee managing an asset owned by an independent legal entity. Your claim to 50% of Lumina Digital is legally non-existent. You have absolutely zero legal claim to a single penny of that $40 million. Greg stared at his lawyer, his chest heaving. David. Greg barked, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. Tell him he is lying. Tell him we are filing the injunction anyway. David slowly closed the folder. He did not look at Greg. He did not look at Amanda or Rachel, who were both sitting completely motionless, their dreams of corporate control evaporating into thin air. David just stared blankly at the polished mahogany table. In the cutthroat world of high-asset divorce attorneys like David, often worked on a contingency or leveraged the expected payout. David had just realized he had spent the last 2 weeks working around the clock for a client who possessed absolutely nothing of value. The injunction is dead, David whispered, his voice hoarse. He finally looked up at Mr. Caldwell, professional defeat written across every line of his face. The trust is ironclad. We cannot pierce it. Delaware law protects the assets entirely from marital property claims. No, Greg shouted, slamming his fist down on the table. The sudden violence echoed loudly in the glass room. That is impossible. She hid this from me. You cannot just hide $40 million. You did not bother to look, I said quietly, speaking for the first time since we sat down. I looked Greg directly in the eyes. I did not hide anything. You were just too busy treating me like a failure to notice I was building an empire. I shifted my gaze away from my hyperventilating husband and locked eyes with Rachel. She was sitting stiffly next to Amanda, her earlier smugness completely obliterated by Mr. Caldwell's legal masterclass. But her nightmare was only just beginning. "Now that we have established that you are getting absolutely nothing from my company, Greg," I said, leaning forward slightly and placing my hands flat on the mahogany table, "let us talk about the 50 acres of land you tried to force me to sell to cover your federal crimes." Rachel swallowed hard, trying to maintain her corporate composure. "This is a divorce settlement meeting, Natalie. Your real estate assets are between you and your husband. It has nothing to do with me." I smiled, a cold, terrifying smile that made her flinch. "It has everything to do with you, Rachel. Because the only reason Greg needed $500,000 in illegal liquid capital was to act on the highly confidential insider information you provided him regarding the Apex Media acquisition." Rachel's face turned ash gray. "I do not know what you are talking about," she stammered, her voice lacking its usual aggressive bite. "I never gave Greg any insider information. I am a respected corporate director." I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out the small metal flash drive Nia had slipped to me during the family screaming match 2 weeks ago. I placed it gently on the table. The metallic clink echoed loudly in the quiet room. "My sister-in-law Nia is a remarkable woman," I stated, my voice echoing off the glass walls. "Unlike everyone else in my family, she actually knows how to read financial trails. On this drive are the county clerk title records proving Greg forged my signature. But more importantly, it contains the wire transfers from Greg's bank directly to an offshore brokerage account. Those transfers are perfectly timed with a series of encrypted emails sent from your personal laptop, Rachel. You fed him the Lumina digital buyout details weeks before the deal was finalized so he could buy call options." David, the divorce lawyer, slowly pushed his chair away from the table. He was physically distancing himself from his own client. "Insider trading," David muttered, looking at Greg with absolute disgust. "You dragged me into a high-asset divorce case funded by wire fraud and insider trading." "It gets significantly worse, David," I said, not taking my eyes off Rachel. "I did not just keep this flash drive in my pocket. 2 days ago, Mr. Caldwell and I submitted a comprehensive whistleblower report to the Securities and Exchange Commission. We handed over the wire transfers, the forged loan documents, and the email logs. The SEC takes a very strong stance against corporate directors who use shell companies and foolish bank managers to manipulate the stock market." Rachel jumped out of her chair. "You reported me to the SEC?" She shrieked, her voice cracking in pure panic. "You vindictive little brat. You have no proof. Those emails could be from anyone. You are just trying to scare me." Right on cue, as if the universe itself was orchestrating the timing of my revenge. Rachel's cell phone began to vibrate violently against the polished wood of the conference table. The caller ID flashed brightly for everyone in the room to see. It read, "Apex Media Legal Department." Rachel stared at the ringing phone as if it were a live grenade. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely swipe the screen to answer it. She slowly brought the phone to her ear. "Yes," she whispered, her corporate bravado completely shattered. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the faint, sharp voice of the executive on the other end of the line. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Rachel did not argue. She did not defend herself. She just listened as her entire life was systematically dismantled. When the call ended, her phone slipped from her trembling fingers and clattered onto the table. "They fired me." Rachel gasped, her eyes wide and unblinking, staring blankly at the far wall. "HR and legal just escorted my assistant out of the building. The SEC raided my office an hour ago. They seized my hard drives. They are freezing all of my assets pending a massive federal investigation." She turned to Amanda, her eyes filling with desperate tears. She reached out, grasping at the last lifeline she thought she had. "Amanda, baby, I am going to need that family trust money for a defense attorney. They are talking about serious federal prison time. I could lose everything." Amanda stared at Rachel. My sister, who had spent her entire life leaping from one comfortable lily pad to the next, evaluated the sinking ship in front of her. Amanda slowly stood up, smoothing the wrinkles out of her designer skirt with steady hands. "Are you insane?" Amanda asked, her voice dripping with ice-cold disdain. You think I am going to let my family's pristine name get dragged into a federal insider trading scandal? You lied to me, Rachel. You told me you were a legitimate executive. You are nothing but a common criminal. Rachel reached out, trying to grab Amanda's hand. Amanda, please. We were going to build a life together. You said you loved me. You promised we would run Lumina Digital together. Amanda physically recoiled, swatting Rachel's hand away as if she were carrying a highly contagious disease. I loved the vice president of Apex Media, Amanda snapped, showing her true shallow colors. I do not love an unemployed felon under federal investigation. We are completely done. Do not ever contact me again. Amanda grabbed her expensive handbag, turned on her heel, and marched out of the glass conference room without looking back. She abandoned Rachel the exact same way she had abandoned me my entire life. The instant someone was no longer useful to her, they ceased to exist. Rachel slumped back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. The sound of her quiet sobbing filled the vast conference room. Nobody offered her a tissue. Nobody offered her comfort. She was a casualty of her own greed, left to face the federal consequences entirely alone. Greg watched Amanda walk out, his eyes wide. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously against his crisp collar. He looked at Rachel, then slowly turned his attention back to me. The absolute arrogance that had fueled him for the past 2 weeks was gone, but his survival instinct kicked in. He let out a harsh, nervous laugh that echoed awkwardly against the glass walls. Well, Greg said, running a trembling hand through his hair. That is certainly unfortunate for Rachel. She played a dangerous game and lost. But her corporate mess has absolutely nothing to do with our divorce settlement. He adjusted his suit jacket, desperately trying to project an air of control that had completely vanished from the room. Fine, Natalie. You win on the company front. The trust protects Lumina Digital. I will concede that point. We do not need to drag this out in family court and waste everyone's valuable time. He looked at David, hoping for some legal backup, but David was busy packing his leather briefcase. The ruthless divorce attorney wanted absolutely nothing to do with this radioactive case. David zipped his bag shut, completely abandoning his client. Greg turned back to me, his voice taking on a pathetic, negotiating tone. I will just take the marital home and the $500,000 in cash from the home equity line of credit. I will walk away clean. We sign the papers today, and you never have to see me again. I can live comfortably on the $500,000 while I find a new position at a different bank. It is a win for both of us. I stared at him. The sheer delusion of this man was staggering. He had forged my signature to steal $500,000, lost it on a bad stock tip, and still believed he was walking away with a golden parachute. You think you still have the house? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You think you still have the $500,000? Greg frowned, his nervous smile faltering slightly. Yes, the money is sitting in my offshore brokerage account. The house is still in both our names. I am willing to take full ownership of the property and the debt. I am doing you a massive favor, Natalie. I did not respond to his ridiculous offer. I simply turned my head slightly and nodded at Mr. Caldwell. My attorney reached into his manila folder one last time. He pulled out a single sheet of heavy legal paper and slid it across the polished mahogany table. It stopped directly in front of Greg's trembling hands. The bold black lettering at the top of the page read, Notice of Assignment of Debt. Read it carefully. Greg, Mr. Caldwell instructed, his tone devoid of any sympathy. Greg picked up the paper. His eyes darted across the dense legal jargon, his face turning an alarming shade of gray. What is this? He stammered. What does this mean? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. It means you are completely out of options, Greg. When the Apex Media acquisition collapsed 2 weeks ago, the stock you bet heavily on took a massive nosedive. Your brokerage account issued an immediate margin call. Since you could not cover the massive financial losses, your account was liquidated and frozen by federal regulators. The $500,000 you thought you had tucked away is completely gone. Greg shook his head frantically. No, that cannot be right. Even if the stock dipped, I still have the house. The bank holds the mortgage. That is where you are wrong again, I corrected him, my voice turning to absolute ice. When the margin call hit and your accounts were frozen, your bank initiated an internal audit. They quickly discovered the irregularities in the home equity loan you processed. They discovered the forged signature and the bribed notary. Your loan went into immediate catastrophic default. Greg gripped the edges of the table, his knuckles turning stark white as his breathing grew shallow and rapid. Banks do not like holding toxic, fraudulent debt, Mr. Caldwell interjected smoothly. They prefer to offload it to private equity firms to recoup their losses quietly, avoiding public scandal. I looked directly into Greg's terrified eyes. 2 days ago, a private equity firm called Obsidian Holdings purchased your defaulted $500,000 debt from the bank for pennies on the dollar. Obsidian Holdings is a direct subsidiary of the Horizon Blind Irrevocable Trust. It took a few agonizing seconds for the horrific reality to penetrate his panic-stricken brain. When it finally did, all the air seemed to leave his lungs at once. "You?" Greg whispered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the word. "You bought my debt." "Yes," I replied, savoring every single syllable. "I do not just own the house, Greg. I own your fraudulent loan. I am legally your primary and sole creditor. You owe me $500,000 payable immediately in full, and since you are completely broke, unemployed, and about to be indicted for federal bank fraud, I am going to foreclose on the house today. You have absolutely nothing." The finality of those words struck Greg with the force of a physical blow. The absolute reality of his situation finally shattered the last remaining fragments of his ego. He had walked into this glass conference room expecting to walk out a multimillionaire. Instead, he was leaving as a destitute, soon-to-be convicted felon with no home, no wife, and no future. His legs simply gave out. Greg collapsed onto the carpeted floor of the boardroom. He fell to his knees, his expensive custom-tailored suit wrinkling around him. He reached out his trembling hands, gripping the edge of the polished mahogany table, as if it were the only thing keeping him from falling off the face of the earth. "Natalie, please!" Greg sobbed. The sound was guttural, an ugly, raw sound of absolute despair. It was the sound of a man who realized he had set his own life on fire and locked himself inside. Tears streamed down his flushed face, dripping onto his crisp white collar. "You cannot do this to me. I am your husband. We took vows. I love you. I have always loved you. I just made a stupid mistake. I wanted to provide for us. I wanted to give you the world. Please, I am begging you. Do not take the house. Do not leave me with this debt. I will go to prison. They will destroy me in there." I looked down at the man kneeling at my feet. I searched my heart for a single ounce of pity, a single shred of the love I once held for him. There was nothing. All I saw was the man who had gripped my thigh under a restaurant table and ordered me to stay quiet so he could impress people who despised me. Before I could even formulate a response to his pathetic begging, the heavy glass door of the conference room swung violently open. Amanda marched back inside. In her haste to abandon Rachel, she had left her expensive designer handbag sitting on the corner credenza. Rachel, who had been sitting frozen in her chair, snapped out of her catatonic state the moment she saw Amanda. The sheer terror of her federal investigation instantly morphed into unhinged, desperate rage. "You coward!" Rachel shrieked, her voice echoing deafeningly against the glass walls. Rachel lunged across the room. She did not just yell at my sister, she physically attacked her. Rachel grabbed Amanda by the lapels of her designer jacket, slamming her backward against the glass wall. The impact rattled the heavy pane. "You are not leaving me to take the fall for this!" Rachel's scream, spit flying from her lips as she shook Amanda violently. "You enjoyed every single dollar I brought in. You pushed me to close the Lumina deal so you could buy your stupid country club membership. You are going to pay for my lawyers, or I swear to God, I will tell the federal investigators that you knew about the insider trading the entire time." Amanda shrieked in terror, her hands clawing desperately at Rachel's grip. "Let go of me, you psychotic felon! I do not know anything about your illegal money. Security! Somebody call security!" The two women grappled against the glass, their pristine corporate images entirely destroyed. Amanda swung her heavy handbag, catching Rachel hard on the side of the head. Rachel retaliated by grabbing a fistful of Amanda's perfectly styled blonde hair, yanking her down toward the floor. David, the ruthless divorce attorney, stood up. He calmly observed the two women rolling on the floor, tearing at each other's expensive clothes, and then looked down at Greg, who was still kneeling by the table, weeping uncontrollably. David did not try to break up the fight. He did not offer his client a tissue. He simply snapped the golden clasps of his leather briefcase shut. The sharp click cut through the sounds of sobbing and screaming. "Mr. Caldwell," David said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion, "I am officially withdrawing as counsel for the petitioner, effective immediately. Good luck with the SEC." Without another word, David walked past. His weeping client stepped carefully around the two women wrestling near the doorway and exited the boardroom. He knew a dead end when he saw one, and he was not going to stick around to bill hours to a man who owed $500,000 to his own wife. The carnage in the room was absolute. My sister and her girlfriend were destroying each other in the corner. My husband was begging for mercy on his knees. The family that had spent 33 years trying to make me feel small had entirely consumed themselves. I stood up from my leather chair. I reached down and slowly buttoned the front of my midnight blue blazer. I picked up my tote bag. "Thank you for your time today, Mr. Caldwell," I said softly. "It was my pleasure, Natalie," he replied, packing his single manila folder away. I did not look at Greg. I did not look at Amanda or Rachel. I turned my back on all of them and walked out of the glass room without saying a single word. My silence was the final devastating blow. 1 month later, the crisp autumn chill had settled over Chicago, but the cold weather was nothing compared to the absolute freeze that had descended upon Greg's life. The fallout from the conference room did not just happen, it detonated. 2 weeks after our catastrophic settlement meeting, federal agents from the Securities and Exchange Commission, flanked by the FBI, walked straight into the retail bank branch where Greg had spent years pretending to be a titan of finance. They did not wait for him to finish his morning coffee. They marched into his glass-enclosed office, read him his Miranda rights in front of the entire loan department, and escorted him out the front doors in handcuffs. By noon that same day, the bank had officially terminated his employment, wiping his corporate profile from their directory before he even reached the federal holding facility. He was formally indicted on multiple counts of federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. The $50,000 bail was posted by a cheap bail bondsman because, true to my word, Greg had absolutely no liquid capital left. His offshore accounts had been seized by the government, and his insider trading dreams were dead. While Greg was busy navigating the terrifying reality of his federal indictment, my legal team was executing the final phase of my revenge with surgical precision. Obsidian Holdings, the private equity subsidiary of my trust, moved to foreclose on the marital home. Because the home equity line of credit had been secured through documented forgery, and the primary borrower was now under federal indictment for that exact fraud, the judge granted an expedited foreclosure. Greg had tried to contest it, claiming marital rights, but without a lawyer willing to take his penniless case, his desperate motions were thrown out of court. The eviction notice was taped to the front door, giving him exactly 72 hours to vacate the premises. He spent those 72 hours leaving me increasingly unhinged, pathetic voicemails. He begged, he bargained, he threatened, and then he begged some more. I did not listen to a single one. I simply deleted them and waited for Tuesday morning. I arrived at the house exactly at 9 o'clock on the morning of the eviction. I parked my car across the street, rolling down the window to feel the sharp morning breeze. The quiet suburban neighborhood was peaceful, utterly unaware of the storm about to hit. 10 minutes later, 2 county sheriff cruisers turned onto the street, their heavy tires crunching against the fallen leaves. They pulled directly into my driveway, the red and blue lights flashing silently, casting colorful reflections against the white siding of the house. 2 uniformed deputies stepped out of the vehicles. They walked up the front steps with a heavy, authoritative presence and pounded loudly on the front door. The sound echoed down the quiet street. For a long minute, nothing happened. Then the door slowly opened. Greg stood in the doorway. The transformation was startling. The man who had worn a custom-tailored suit to our divorce meeting was gone. He was wearing wrinkled sweatpants and a stained t-shirt. His hair was unkempt, his face unshaven, and his eyes were hollow and bloodshot. He looked like a man who had not slept in a month. Gregory, the taller deputy, announced, his voice carrying over the front lawn. "We have a court-ordered writ of possession. You are required to vacate this property immediately. Step outside." Greg tried to argue. I could see his hands shaking as he pointed back inside the house, his voice a desperate high-pitched whine. "You cannot do this," he pleaded. "I just need a few more days. I have nowhere to go. My brother will not take my calls. Please let me just grab some more of my things." The deputy placed his hand firmly on his utility belt, stepping closer. "You had 72 hours to gather your belongings, sir. Step out of the house right now, or you will be removed by force and charged with trespassing." Greg looked at the deputy, the last remaining shred of his fight leaving his body. He slowly turned around, grabbed a single scuffed canvas duffel bag sitting in the foyer, and walked out of the house. He dragged his feet down the brick steps, looking incredibly small and utterly defeated. As soon as he cleared the porch, a white van pulled into the driveway behind the cruisers. The locksmith had arrived. A man in a work jacket hopped out, grabbed his heavy tool belt, and marched up to the front door. The loud, piercing screech of a power drill instantly filled the air. Metal shavings fell to the welcome mat as the locksmith systematically destroyed the old deadbolts, replacing them with brand-new, impenetrable locks. The sound was incredibly loud, metallic, and beautiful. It was the sound of true, undeniable finality. Greg stood on the curb at the end of the driveway, clutching his single bag. Several neighbors had stepped out onto their porches, watching the disgraced bank manager being thrown out of his own home by the police. He looked up and finally noticed my car parked across the street. Our eyes locked. There was no screaming this time, no legal threats, no arrogant demands for $20 million. There was only the cold, harsh reality of the pavement beneath his feet. I held his gaze for a long moment, making sure he understood that this was the exact destiny he had chosen when he forged my name. Then I slowly rolled up my window, put the car in drive, and left him standing alone on the curb. I drove away from that curb without ever looking back in my rearview mirror. Leaving Greg to face his federal indictment on the street was the closing of one door, but the total collapse of my family was happening simultaneously across the city. The dominoes I had tipped over in that glass conference room were falling with spectacular speed, and the collateral damage was entirely of their own making. It started with Amanda. The federal investigation into Rachel's insider trading and corporate espionage did not remain a quiet internal matter at Apex Media. 2 days after our divorce settlement meeting, the Securities and Exchange Commission issued a public press release regarding the raid and the pending criminal charges. It made the front page of the Chicago business journals. Rachel's face, looking haggard and terrified, leaving a federal courthouse, was broadcast on the evening news. Amanda, who had built her entire identity around her pristine social standing, suddenly found herself at the center of a massive financial scandal. Her elite social circle, the one she had constantly weaponized against me, dropped her with astonishing speed. The wealthy wives and old money heiresses at her exclusive country club wanted absolutely nothing to do with a woman tied to a federal probe. Her membership was quietly but firmly revoked under a morality clause. Her daily brunch invitations vanished. When she walked into her favorite high-end boutiques, the managers who used to greet her by name suddenly found themselves too busy to assist her. Amanda tried frantically to distance herself, claiming she had broken up with Rachel the moment she found out about the illegal activity. But nobody believed the golden child. She had bragged too loudly about the Apex Media acquisition. She had flaunted the lavish gifts Rachel bought with dirty money. The high society world she had desperately clung to chewed her up and spat her out, leaving her isolated in an expensive downtown apartment she could no longer afford. With their golden child's reputation decimated and their bank accounts drained by Amanda's sudden need for emergency living expenses, my parents panicked. Richard and Susan finally realized they had placed all their bets on the wrong horse. The realization that the daughter they had abused and dismissed was sitting on a legitimate $40 million empire suddenly sparked a desperate, hypocritical change of heart. A week after the foreclosure, I was sitting in my new corner office on the top floor of the Lumina Digital headquarters. We had just relocated to a state-of-the-art building in the financial district. I was reviewing a quarterly expansion report when my desk phone buzzed. It was the head of building security. Ms. Natalie, the guard, said, his tone professional but slightly strained. There is an older couple in the lobby causing a disturbance. They are claiming to be your parents. They say it is a family emergency and they demand to be led up to the executive floor. I pulled up the live feed from the lobby security cameras on my computer monitor. There they were, Richard and Susan. My father was pacing angrily near the polished marble reception desk, pointing his finger at the security staff. My mother was standing right behind him, clutching her designer purse, trying to look dignified while her face flushed with frantic desperation. They looked small. Stripped of the power they used to wield over me in their colonial house, they were just two desperate people standing in a building I owned, begging for access. They had entirely lost the right to demand. Keep them in the lobby, I told the guard. I will be right down. I stepped into my private elevator and rode it down to the ground floor. The doors slid open with a soft chime. The moment my mother saw me step into the expansive glass lobby, she pushed past a security guard and rushed forward, her hands outstretched. Natalie Susan cried out, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Oh, thank goodness. You have to tell these guards to let us through. We need to talk to you. Please, sweetheart. We made a terrible mistake." My father followed closely behind her, attempting to revive his old authoritative posture, but his eyes betrayed his sheer panic. "Natalie, we need to sit down and discuss a temporary loan. The trust is tied up and Amanda is facing a severe financial crisis. You are family. You have to help us." I stopped 10 feet away from them. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of anger. I just looked at them with absolute, unshakable indifference. "You told me I was dead to this family," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet lobby. "You told me I was a useless disappointment. I am simply honoring your words, Richard. You do not have a daughter named Natalie anymore, and you certainly do not have a bank." My mother let out a hysterical sob, reaching out for me again. "Please, we are your parents. You cannot just turn your back on us. We will apologize. We will do whatever you want." I turned to the two burly security guards standing by the reception desk. "Escort them off the premises," I ordered calmly. "If they attempt to enter this building again, call the police and have them arrested for trespassing." My father started to shout, his face turning red with rage and humiliation, but the guards immediately flanked them. They gripped Richard and Susan by their arms and physically marched them toward the revolving glass doors. I watched them struggle, watched my mother crying uncontrollably as they were pushed out onto the busy Chicago sidewalk. I turned around, stepped back into my private elevator, and pressed the button for the top floor. As the cab smoothly ascended, I pulled my cell phone from my pocket. I opened my contacts, selected my mother's number, and hit block. I did the exact same thing for my father and Amanda. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, feeling lighter than I had in 33 years. They were completely erased from my existence. The elevator doors opened to my executive suite, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely untethered. The toxic weight that had anchored me to my family's expectations was gone. I spent the rest of the afternoon finalizing the national expansion budget for Lumina Digital, my mind clear and intensely focused. But as the sun began to set over the Chicago skyline, painting the city in vibrant shades of orange and gold, I knew there was one final piece of business I needed to attend to. It was time to reward the only people who had stood by me when the wolves were circling. That evening, I reserved a private dining room at the Sovereign, an ultra-exclusive restaurant overlooking the river. It was an intentional choice. I wanted to replace the bitter memory of that disastrous dinner at Le Bouclier with something entirely new. When I arrived, the maitre d' escorted me to a quiet, candlelit room where the city lights sparkled through the glass walls. A few minutes later, the heavy oak door swung open and Jason walked in, holding hands with Nia. They both looked stunning. Nia wore a sharp emerald green dress that perfectly complemented her dark, flawless skin, and Jason looked relaxed wearing a tailored charcoal suit. The moment he saw me, Jason let go of Nia's hand and pulled me into a tight, genuine hug. "I am so proud of you," Jason whispered, holding me a second longer than usual. "The news about Greg and Rachel is everywhere. You actually did it. You burned them to the ground." I smiled, pulling back to look at my brother. "I had a little help," I said, turning my attention to Nia. Nia stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. It was a warm, sisterly embrace that I had never experienced with Amanda. "You did the heavy lifting," Natalie, Nia said, taking a seat at the table. "I just gave you the ammunition. By the way, I saw your parents wandering around the financial district today, looking like they had seen a ghost. I assume they tried to pay you a visit." "They did," I replied, picking up my menu. "And security escorted them right back out. I blocked their numbers. It is finally over." Jason nodded, a look of profound relief washing over his face. He signaled the sommelier to bring a bottle of vintage champagne. We spent the first hour of dinner talking, laughing, and enjoying the sheer absurdity of how quickly the mighty had fallen. We ate caviar and truffle risotto, the food tasting infinitely better, without the bitter seasoning of my mother's condescension or Amanda's arrogance. But as the waiter cleared our main courses, I wiped my mouth with a linen napkin and reached into my designer tote bag. I pulled out a thick leather-bound folder and placed it squarely in the center of the table right in front of Nia. "What is this?" Nia asked, raising an eyebrow as she looked at the embossed Lumina Digital logo on the cover. "Open it," I instructed gently. Nia opened the folder. Her sharp, analytical eyes immediately began scanning the dense legal text on the first page. The room went completely silent as she read. I watched her perfectly composed expression shift. Her eyes widened, her lips parted slightly, and she read the document a second time, just to make sure she had not hallucinated the numbers. "Natalie," Nia whispered, looking up at me in absolute shock. "This is a national exclusivity contract." "It is," I confirmed, leaning forward and resting my arms on the table. "Lumina Digital is expanding. We are opening regional headquarters in New York, Austin, Atlanta, and Los Angeles over the next 18 months. I need massive premium commercial office spaces to house my new creative teams. I need a broker who is ruthless, brilliant, and completely loyal." I tapped the leather folder. "That contract guarantees your brokerage the exclusive rights to negotiate and acquire every single piece of commercial real estate for Lumina Digital's national expansion. The projected commission structures are outlined on page 4. Jason leaned over, his eyes scanning the page. He let out a low whistle. "Natalie, this is a multi-million-dollar account. This contract alone will make Nia a senior partner at her firm. It gives her enough leverage to start her own brokerage if she wants to." "She deserves to start her own brokerage," I said, looking directly at my beautiful, brilliant sister-in-law. "When my own husband tried to destroy me, and my parents tried to strip me of my inheritance, you were the only one who stepped between me and the fire. You risked your own peace to protect mine. You saw my value before you ever saw my bank account. That is the kind of person I want running my real estate acquisitions." Nia blinked rapidly, her eyes shining with unshed tears. For a woman who was famously tough in boardrooms, she looked incredibly moved. She reached across the table and took my hand, giving it a firm, powerful squeeze. "I will get you the best buildings in the country, Natalie. Nobody will ever outbid us." Jason smiled, picking up his crystal flute of champagne. He raised it high, the golden liquid catching the candlelight. "To true family," Jason said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not the ones we were forced to grow up with, but the ones we choose to build our lives with." Nia and I raised our glasses, clinking them against his. The crisp sound rang out in the private dining room, marking the beginning of a genuine empire and the end of a lifetime of apologies. 6 months have passed since that dinner at the Sovereign. The transition from the shadows into the light has been nothing short of spectacular. I am standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new penthouse office, looking out over the sprawling Chicago skyline. The morning sun reflects off the glass and steel of the skyscrapers, casting a brilliant golden glow over the city. Below me, the streets are a maze of yellow cabs and rushing pedestrians, completely oblivious to the empire operating hundreds of feet above their heads. My office is a sanctuary of quiet power. There is no yelling here. There are no insults hurled across dinner tables, no condescending smirks, no desperate pleas for validation. The only sounds are the soft hum of the climate control and the occasional ping of an incoming email on my computer terminal. I run a national media conglomerate. Yet my life has never been so incredibly peaceful. I press my hand against the cool glass of the window, tracing the outline of the city. For 33 years, my family used volume as a weapon. They weaponized noise to create an illusion of authority. My father used his booming voice to command obedience. My mother used her shrill, hysterical shrieks to manipulate guilt. Amanda used her loud, dramatic tears to play the victim. Rachel used her aggressive, rapid-fire corporate jargon to intimidate. And Greg used his furious, desperate yelling to mask his own staggering incompetence. They all firmly believed that whoever screamed the loudest, whoever took up the most physical and emotional space in a room, was the most important person there. They looked at me sitting quietly in my plain clothes, absorbing their insults without a word, and they saw a punching bag. They saw a scapegoat. They genuinely mistook my silence for submission, and they mistook my patience for weakness. They never understood that while they were busy making noise, I was busy making moves. I looked down at the financial district where Greg once walked around pretending to be a master of the universe. Yesterday, my legal team informed me that Greg officially signed a plea agreement with the federal prosecutors. He will be spending the next 48 months in a federal correctional facility, completely stripped of his banking licenses and his dignity. Rachel received a similar fate, permanently barred from acting as an officer or director of any public company, her lucrative career entirely reduced to ashes. Amanda was forced to downsize to a tiny studio apartment on the outskirts of the city, liquidating her designer wardrobe just to afford groceries. And my parents, the architects of this entire toxic dynamic, are living in complete social isolation. The high society circles they worshipped have entirely shunned them, not just because of the federal scandals, but because the truth about how they treated their own daughter finally became public knowledge. They spent their entire lives cultivating a perfect image, only to have it completely destroyed by the very people they favored. I do not feel a sense of manic joy at their downfall. I do not throw parties to celebrate their misery. What I feel is something infinitely better. I feel complete, absolute indifference. They are simply characters in a chapter of my life that I have permanently closed. If you are watching this and you are the one sitting quietly at the family dinner table while people who should love you tear you down, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Society pushes a dangerous narrative about family. They tell us that blood is thicker than water. They tell us that we must forgive every transgression, tolerate every disrespect, and swallow every insult simply because we share DNA. It is a toxic lie designed to keep you trapped in a cycle of abuse. You do not owe your loyalty to people who constantly disrespect your boundaries. You do not owe your success to people who actively prayed for your failure. You have the absolute right to walk away. You have the right to build a chosen family like I did with Jason and Nia, composed of people who celebrate your victories instead of trying to steal them. Do not let them rush your process. Take your time. Build your foundation quietly, securely, and completely out of their sight. Let them have their loud, arrogant moments. Let them believe they have won. Let them mock your silence. Let them underestimate your quiet hustle. Because the ultimate revenge isn't screaming back, it's buying the building they're standing in and serving them the eviction notice.